The global cost of online crime is expected to reach $6 trillion by 2021. Cyber attacks are now one of the biggest concerns for governments and companies around the world. An international conference in Qatar is now looking at ways to fight cybercrime. But are we doing enough to defend ourselves? And do we even understand the risks? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Darren Jordon. A ransomware cyber attack happens every 14 seconds. In the past year alone, there's been an 11% increase in security breaches by hackers. These growing figures show just how big a threat cybercrime has become. With security experts fighting the hackers, the cybercrime economy is growing so quickly, it's now making profits of $1.5 trillion each year. A recent Microsoft survey suggests executives now consider cyber attacks to be the top threat to their businesses. Experts are gathered here in Qatar's capital, Doha, to boost cyber defence and formulate digital policy. Well, here are some of the world's most high-profile cyber attacks. In 2013, Yahoo shocked the world when it confirmed that a cyber attack had affected all 3 billion of its user accounts. In 2014, the US entertainment group Sony Pictures was attacked. Hackers demanded the cancellation of the release of The Interview, a comedy that depicted an assassination plot against North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. In 2018, the US, along with Australia, Canada, the UK and New Zealand, all accused China of conducting a 12-year global campaign of cyber espionage. Russia is accused of hacking the accounts of democratic officials in the US in an attempt to sway people to vote for Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. And just this week in Georgia, thousands of websites were attacked, including those of the president, the courts and the media. TV stations were hacked and temporarily unable to broadcast. Well, let's bring in our guests. Mark Eiza is a lecturer in computer and network security at the University of Central Lancashire. He joins us from Preston in the United Kingdom. And Mark Einstein is Chief Analyst for Digital Services at ITR Japan. That's a research and advisory firm focused on IT. He joins us from Tokyo. Welcome to both our guests. Mark Einstein, let me start with you, if I may, because you've worked with companies around the world in setting up their cyber defences. But given the scale of the threat today and the sophistication of cyber attacks, are we losing the battle against the hackers? And if so, why?
I think you can make the case that we are. Now we have this phenomenon called the Internet of Things, which is several years old now. This is the number one reason that companies are really hesitant to be more and more connected. I think what is so interesting about this is that the majority of the hacks that we see are actually not very sophisticated. They're caused by things for having default passwords or passwords like 12345. These basic mistakes are holding back billions or even $1 trillion in corporate productivity.
Max Eiza there in Preston. I mean, the head of Britain's National Cybersecurity Centre recently warned that the UK will be hit by a life-threatening Category 1 cyber emergency in the very near future. I mean, that sounds absolutely terrifying. I mean, so what does that mean? And how prepared is Britain to defend itself against something so horrifying, to be honest?
Absolutely, it is terrifying news. And we have seen, the WannaCry, the NHS attack that happened in 2017, showed us how devastating a cyber attack could be on a public sector service like the National Health Service. And since then, there have been a lot of countermeasure that has been taken, lesson has been learned, and we're trying now to put countermeasure and defenses in place. But as Mark said, no one will be 100% protected because of the huge amount of devices we have these days, the different technologies we are using these days. If you have a great security, but you have a weak password, then your security will be defenseless. So we are also, while working on the technology and the defense, we're also working on to user awareness, trying to raise people's awareness to their password, to their security, to their data privacy, trying to work on both sides, technology and the human.
Let me bring in back Mark there in Tokyo. I mean, Mark, just explain to our viewers why cybersecurity is so important. I mean, governments and companies now seem to be spending huge amounts of money on security to protect themselves. Have they been mostly successful? And what does it take, do you think, to win the war against cyber attacks, against the cyber criminals?
So I think that, basically we live in an era of increased connectivity. I think one of the most interesting examples that I saw very recently was in the UK. One of the new airports there actually has their air traffic control center off-site. So there's no tower in this airport. It's remote. If somebody hacked into this, you could easily kill thousands of people, shut down an economy. We're not seeing these kind of catastrophic events happen yet, but there certainly is a potential. There's an increasing potential. I think, part of the solution to this is going to be advanced AI technology. There's just so much data traffic now. There's so many connected devices, and there just aren't enough people that can sit in front of a computer screen and monitor what's going on. This is going to have to be automated, and this is going to require artificial intelligence going forward, in my opinion.
All right. Well, as you've touched on the issue of AI, let me put that to Max Eiza there in Preston. I mean, Max, what about the rise then of artificial intelligence? Will this require a new dialogue, a new awareness of the challenges within the AI space?
I totally agree with Mark. We need AI technologies to step in and employ these technologies into cyber defense to protect the assets. And because we don't have enough human power, let's say, I mean, we need loads and loads of superhumans to actually sit down and look at massive amount of data and try to work out if there's an attack happening or if there's an attack about to happen, etc. Recent reports is showing that companies and corporations are struggling to identify the risks, let alone actually defending against cyber attacks, because there's a lot of information to digest and analyze and produce results. So I think AI will be a massive help into this arena. And let me bring also the other term we use sometimes interchangeably here, which is machine learning. So we can actually use machine learning. As I said, let's imagine a superhuman who can sit and look at massive amounts of data, learn these data, learn the pattern, see how they interact with each other, and predict that this asset could be under attack, or this attack is actually happening right now, and produce defenses or countermeasures against them. So I totally agree. AI and machine learning will be a massive help in the near future.
Mark, I mean, you're nodding there. Are we talking about artificial intelligence only here, or are we talking about augmented intelligence with human input as well?
I think we're talking about both, but what I'm specifically talking about, which was just echoed by the other panelists, is that we need kind of superhuman abilities, but we also need automated abilities. We're not quite there yet with the technology. I think going forward, we're going to start with kind of the machine learning, which is where we are now, then get into more AI, and then get into more augmented intelligence is kind of how I would see the market developing.
Yeah, Max, let me come back to you because you touched briefly on the issue of understanding the risks. Is there a sense that one of the reasons that governments and companies and ordinary people like you and I become victims of cybercrime is that we don't actually understand the risks to ourselves, our money, our data, and our privacy? The risk issue is very important, isn't it?
It is indeed, and part of the reason we don't understand the risk is that we do not allow enough time for the technology to be tested and for the risks to be assessed. And this is, again, reflected partially because we don't have enough power, like I said, the human power to actually sit down and do all the analysis, and also partially as well because technologies and companies usually rush into releasing their products, for marketing and competition purposes. So we end up sometimes with a lot of products that hasn't been 100% tested, or the risk hasn't been really identified. we end up actually having to take the hit if it happens, and we end up with a lot of news about data breaches or security hacks, etc., on the products that is actually used by people.
Mark Einstein there in Tokyo, let me come to you with a question about risks as well, because in 2017, Microsoft did a survey that found something like 62% of companies saw cyber attacks as a top 5 risk to their businesses. Now, in 2019, that figure jumped to 79%, above other risks like economic uncertainty, brand reputational damage, and so on. Does this indicate, Mark, that companies are starting to at least understand the risks?
I think that that's true. I mean, if I were to, think about that survey, I actually think it should be closer to 100%. I think something that has maybe helped that a little bit is that when the GDPR, the privacy regulations, were introduced in the EU, I think it became very, very clear to everyone in the corporate sector that if you don't secure your data, you could face billions and billions of dollars in fines from the EU. And the EU is not afraid to go after people like Google or Apple or whoever. I think that was a little bit of a wake-up call that may have contributed to that figure.
Let me just stay with you, Mark, and ask you a question about the next big challenge for the cyber industry. I mean, people are now talking about deep fake, for example, and this ability to clone someone's voice and their image. I mean, that's going to be a nightmare for security specialists like you, isn't it?
I think that that is going to be the next big thing. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be chaotic. I think we're very close to being able to clone other people's voices and then, make fraudulent phone calls. But if you even take that a step further, you could have a chatbot that you program with someone's voice to make calls. So you don't even need someone behind the phone to do cybercrime in the next few years. I think this is going to be a disaster. And I think we're not ready for this at all. And I think that we're going to need some new technologies to be able to address this as well.
Yeah, I mean, Max, what's your take then on the next big challenge for the security industry? Is it problems like deepfake and how you combat that?
Well, it's what I mentioned earlier about the use of AI and machine learning into combating against cyber attacks. Unfortunately, these technologies are available also for the attackers. So you can imagine if the attackers start employing AI technologies into their cyber attacks, so the cyber attacks will be more sophisticated. They will be able to learn more about your defenses and try to evade detection, etc. So that will be a very, a big challenge for companies, because while they're trying to use AI and, like I said, machine learning to defend, the attackers or the hackers are using machine learning and artificial intelligence to attack. So that will be a big challenge. That will be a big combat, coming our way, and we need to put the effort. Like Mark said about, the laws and regulations that came into effect, the GDPR, for example, had focused minds into the importance of securing data and making sure that your products are secure. Otherwise, you will be paying a lot of fines. And I think that's a step in the right direction, but there is a long way to go. To put more effort into these technologies.
Mark, let me come back to you for a second, because let's just wind the clock back for a minute. If you look at the evolution of cybercrime, I mean, 20 years ago, it was some spotty teenager in a dark basement trying to hack somebody's email. Now it's huge bank fraud and big state actors using it as a weapon of war, a weapon of fake news. What's changed?
Well, I would say that, you certainly see it on a larger scale. You see certain countries that are able to, disrupt nuclear facilities in others. You do see kind of state-sponsored backing. I think some states have kind of figured out that this is a basically cost-effective way to wage war, and it can also be very profitable for some states. But I would also take a step back at that. If you look at one of the biggest cyber attacks ever, was the Mirai botnet attack in 2016. This was still done by two 16-year-old gamers. So we do have this rise in state-sponsored cyber warfare, but it still can be easy enough that some clever kids with some computer science skills can still do it. So I actually think that we see both.
And Max, if you look at the scale of this week's cyber attack in Georgia, for example, 2,000 websites attacked, TV stations knocked out. The allegation at this point is that Russia was behind the attack. It's purely an allegation. But what's this telling us about the point that Mark Einstein's making about state-sponsored attacks? Is this a new kind of asymmetric warfare, but in cyberspace, do you think?
It is, because some states are realizing that in order to hit back at other states, using cyber warfare is the way to go. So we had now, recently this emerging phenomena about state backed cyber warfare. When not only Russia, I mean, some states like North Korea, for example, there have been a lot of reports saying that they brought a lot of money into their economy, like billions of dollars has been brought into North Korean economy just based on ransomware attacks and the payments that has been made for that. So it is unfortunate. And when you look at it from an individual point of view, the technology, again, like I said, the problem is technology is like two sides. So we have the Bitcoin phenomena in the last few years and the rise of that Bitcoin price, nearly $10,000. So Bitcoin has been is very attractive, is untraceable currency. So it is tempting for a lot of individuals or kids or even organizations to mount attacks and profit from them, whether you have an ideological reason to do it or political or even just for profit or easy money.
Mark, I want to ask you a quick question, if I can, about the value of data, because cyber attacks, of course, can lead to the loss of money, data, reputation and privacy, amongst other things. But are we now seeing more cyber attacks because of the growth of huge amounts of data on this plethora of digital platforms like social media? Why is data so valuable?
Well, I think, a lot of people say that data is the new oil. I've heard of examples of even, farms in Indonesia that make palm oil. I talked to a CEO there recently, and he told me that, hackers were actually going after his connected farm because they're trying to get data that's not on the market, and then they're trying to trade financially and invest from that. So, getting this data that's not public and being able to utilize that, or like the other speaker said about cryptocurrencies, is I think another perfect example. Data is kind of the new oil. It is valuable, and hackers are extremely creative people in terms of either ransoming this data back or using it to make financial gain through financial markets.
All right, let's just move the argument on, if we can, and look ahead at the future of cybersecurity in terms of what you guys will be doing in the next few months and years ahead. Let me start with you, Max, if I may. Are we likely to see, do you think, more companies and corporations forming cybersecurity alliances as a way to share assets and strengthen defenses? I mean, we're already seeing examples like the Cyber Threat Alliance and the Global Cyber Alliance. But do these alliances work? Is there strength in numbers, do you think?
I think so. I think this is an important step, in the right direction, because we need collaborations among different corporations, among states as well. Governments and organizations need to step in and try to promote and encourage these collaborations. Imagine what we do usually when we are looking at the normal crime. The police forces around the globe exchange data and try to come up with a solution. I think with cybersecurity and cybercrime, we need to follow similar approach. We need more collaborations, more alliances. Looking around the globe, there's a lot of effort going on. Like we look for big conferences and summits, trying to bring people together from organizations, corporations, government bodies, to try to put together a task force, if you may say, to progress and try to counterattack the unholy alliance of hackers, because hackers also have their own ways of exchanging data, exchanging targets. So I think we need to do that as well, as a step in the right direction.
Mike Einstein, let me come to you again with this issue about the alliances and play devil's advocate, because some critics say that alliances might not be the way forward because the largest platform companies, like your Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, they're increasingly finding themselves in conflict with governments on issues like policy, on issues like regulation, and they themselves are also targets of cybercrime and cyber attacks.
Right. So I think when you talk about alliances, I do agree that sharing data is certainly not a bad thing. So the more data that a machine learning algorithm has, the stronger it becomes. And so if people are sharing data, working together, that's great. But I think at the end of the day, nobody is 100% safe from a cyber attack. No organization in the world. I think the key to being safe, or the best thing you can do, is you have to be better than your peers. And so I think we're going to see a lot more hacking as a service where you invite people to kind of try out your network. I think that one of the key is you want to appear as secure as you can so you don't become an easy target. So there definitely are benefits to joining alliances, sharing data, and all this kind of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, you also need to be sure that your house is in order as a number one priority.
Yeah, and Max, that's an important point that Mark just made there. I mean, you touched on it. What about powerful nation states coming together? I mean, the European Union, for example, has a number of cyber defense groups, but so far countries like the US, China, Russia, they seem to be against any kind of cooperation. They seem to prefer a more isolationist and state-controlled approach, don't they?
Yeah, that's true. The problem is, unfortunately, like Mark just said, everyone cares about their home being, safe first, and I think there's a bit of resistance against collaboration, especially among big states, because they are competitors in other fields. So I think there's a bit of resistance to collaboration in that field, but nobody is safe, like Mark just said. Nobody is safe, and a cyber attack, unless it's targeting a specific country or it's a state supported, cyber attack will affect every one of us, because technology has no borders, no limitations. Everybody is using technologies, for example, produced in the US, produced in China, for example. So I think, while there is resistance, I think we need to, overcome these differences and collaborate. The sooner, the better. So
let me just end the discussion then, gentlemen, by asking you, Mark, first. What about us as users and consumers? Many of us think that cybersecurity is something for the government, for the black hats. But what can we as individuals do to defend ourselves?
Well, I think that the good news is that this is somewhat easier than some of the things we've been talking about. And again, I think the vast majority of cybercrime that you see is actually fairly basic. It's people that have passwords like 12345. It's people that never change their password. These kinds of things are very, very easy to avoid. I think people need to be more vigilant. I think people that have parents who are in older generations need to, be kind of in touch with what's going on with them. And I think there's a variety of very affordable and very good anti-malware software that's out there. So all of these kinds of things might sound quite obvious, but are not really being followed that strictly, which is why we're having problems.
Max Eiza, a final thought from you then. What can we as ordinary individuals, what can our viewers do to defend ourselves against cyber attacks, against the hackers?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Mark just said about being vigilant, making sure that you don't download applications from unknown sources. You just make sure, for example, when you have a link on an email, unknown email, don't click on that one. Just be aware, make sure that you have, your devices are up to date, your security settings are there. Keep an eye on the news. I mean, sometimes keeping an eye on the news is very important, because if you have something that has been hacked that you need to update, etc. So I think being vigilant, raising awareness, and making sure that you talk to your parents, your children, if you have as well, to make sure that they are secure and private, that is very important.
All right, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much to our guests, Mark Einstein in Tokyo and Dr. Max Eiza in Lancashire. Thank you both. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Darren Jordon, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.